Hello, this is Angela with Social Permaculture. I sat down to film part 2 of the 3-part series I'm doing on social permaculture, and I was just so inundated with comments and questions about my first video that first I want to do a reply to my first video. So if you haven't seen my video on is social permaculture a cure for, a response to, or a way to heal from American toxic individualism, I encourage you to go check out that video first. So YouTube is a really imperfect medium for having back and forth conversations. I read every comment that folks leave. And first of all, I just want to make it really clear on this channel, if you leave conspiracy theories, if you link to work from non-credible sources, if you reference grifters, if you spew xenophobia, racism, transphobia, homophobia, sexism, I will delete your comments. So just don't bother. Don't bother posting that stuff. But when you guys post comments and I read them, I try to reply here and there, but I just don't have the time to reply to everybody. So when I saw that there were a number of comments, both on YouTube and on Facebook, that were all in the same vein, I thought it's probably best that I make a response video because I don't have time to just, reiterate the same thing over and over and over. Hopefully this will be helpful and answer some of your questions. So I want to dive into what is toxic individualism, because I think folks didn't really understand it. I thought it was something that was in the cultural lexicon and sort of like in our popular culture enough that we all know what it means, but perhaps not. And perhaps I haven't conveyed that clearly enough. So I want to clarify that. And then I want to talk about what are the roots of toxic individualism in American culture. And then what do we do about it? If I'm doing a 3-part and now with this, a 4-part series on permaculture, social permaculture, how we can think about community care and people care as permaculturists, and how that will help us become more resilient people, we've got to have a solution for the problem of toxic individualism. So I hope at the end you can help me out with your thoughts and your wisdom, because I feel like we are always stronger together, right? Aha, reply to toxic individualism. We are stronger together, and the hive mind can come up with wonderful solutions that I never could. So if you have thoughts at the end, I would love to read them. So what is toxic individualism? I'm going to link down below to some good articles, including actually one by a student journalist that I think are really successful at helping lay out what is it and how did it come about in American culture. It is a more than not recent development in American culture where we have this belief, and by we, I mean a significant segment of the population has this belief that we don't owe anybody else anything. That it's all about what the individual does, and it's all about taking care of your own needs. It's all about chasing your own American dream, and you had better do it 100% by yourself. We have a very strong and flinching reaction to any time someone brings up socialism in America, or even the word social. I got so many comments on my video because the title was Social Permaculture, and folks were like, socialism, you Marxist. No. We can be social beings, and we can care for each other and not have socialism. I'm sure those of you from democratic socialist countries are laughing really hard right now, but Americans get real freaked out at the idea that we have an obligation to care for each other. So toxic individualism really reared its ugly head in the middle of the pandemic when folks said, I'm not willing to undergo the mild inconvenience of wearing a mask in order to protect you from dying. My right to not feel discomfort trumps your right to live. I don't have to do anything for anybody else. It's about me and what I want in the moment. I don't have an obligation to other people. And we do have an obligation to other people. So this is where it becomes toxic. It's also that notion that because we don't owe other people, we should not have social safety net programs. So toxic individualism, social safety net programs are something that segment of the population gets very upset about. So definitely no welfare, definitely no food stamps, definitely no assistance of any kind for folks who are struggling, because the government shouldn't take care of you. We have individualism in our country. You need to take care of yourself. And if you can't, well, you can just starve. That's fine. If you can't pay your own hospital bills, that's your fault. It's not the fault of our broken healthcare system. So toxic individualism is not only, I don't have an obligation to take care of you. Nobody in society should take care of you. And if you're successful, it's because you've done it all on your own. So how did we get here as a society? How do we get to the place where I don't want to wear a mask, or I don't want to get a vaccine, or I don't want to engage in behavior that is a mild inconvenience to myself, even if it means more people die, right? How do we get to a place where we see, families who are struggling to put food on the table and we say, well, you can just go hungry because you must be lazy. Like, the reason that you are not able to take care of your family must be laziness. So let's talk about the roots of toxic individualism. If you live in a different culture that is more community-minded and more focused on the well-being of your entire community, then I'm a bit jealous of you. But in America, we have a long history of what is known as rugged individualism. And it sort of has its roots in our colonial days, where we obviously failed to acknowledge that this land belonged to many people groups before we decided to come and just settle ourselves here and take it away from them. And we had this concept of manifest destiny, that God has ordained it, that we should go and take over all of the United States. That we as white settlers, that was our privilege and our right. And it was seen as a moral good, right? These empty lands need to be filled up with us, and they need to produce a bounty for us. Part of Manifest Destiny was a sparsely populated country, especially when it came to colonialists, who had loads of space in which to stretch out, right? Land was often free for the taking. The homestead laws in this country meant the land was free for the taking in a lot of places, as long as you would successfully farm it. And you ended up with folks that were relatively isolated. Folks who had perhaps fled situations in Europe where they couldn't own land, where they were essentially serfs who spent their lives in servitude and being exploited by the landowner. And now for the first time, they had the opportunity to own their own land and to use it how they wanted. And it was such an empowering thing for so many immigrants. You got your plot of land, but you were probably fairly isolated. And the American homestead became a situation in which you really didn't see your neighbors very often. In fact, still in many parts of rural America, you are quite spread out from neighbors, and you could easily spend long periods of time never interacting with another human. Now, truly, most of us live in cities, but for a chunk of Americans, the very rural life is still very real. So because you were quite isolated, you had to become self-sufficient. And that became something that was held up. It became a source of pride to say, I can do everything. I can build my house out of sod, or, build a log cabin, that Laura Ingalls Wilder mentality of, I can farm my land, I can take care of my own livestock all by myself. I don't need the government. I don't need neighbors. I can take care of myself. Except the reality is, for the majority of homesteaders, they failed at that because we need other people. And when catastrophe hits, when you get sick, when you become disabled and there was a high level of injury, you have all of your eggs in one basket. As I said in my last video, for me, one of the things I struggle with here is that all of my eggs are in the basket of me. And if something happens to me, I don't have a great support system to prune my orchard, to take care of my poultry, to take care of my children, to take care of my relatives that need it. The homesteader really struggled from this, but it became this kind of legendary status where you want to be self-sufficient, this pride in being able to take care of yourself. And this notion of, I want other people out of my business and I will take care of myself. And it's almost like having a little fiefdom, a little kingdom, where you are the lord of your castle and you control your own plot of land and your own offspring and your own livestock and, a man in his castle. This morphed into this rugged individualism. We as Americans are tough and we are out there scraping by. If you want to pack up and you want to go pursue your dreams and pursue your desire to become wealthy and successful and live the American dream, you can just pack up and go to California and pan for gold. You can pack up and you can go to Wyoming and get a cattle ranch and become a very successful person. There's hope in that message of, like, you can come from nothing and have no resources and you can build yourself up. and you can become something. It was such an appealing message to folks who were trapped, often in essentially what were caste systems in European and other countries, where they could not escape their birthplace, right? And I don't just mean their physical birthplace, I mean where in the social hierarchy they were born, their class. So there were things about this notion of rugged individualism where it's all about me. I get to pursue my own wants. I get to be self-sufficient if I want to, that were very appealing and had elements of good in them. So I don't know if this is a saying in other countries. It is a saying in America that you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps. We have such a significant component of our population that is vehemently opposed to any sort of social safety net whatsoever. Any sort of welfare programs, any sort of caring for the poor, caring for those who are disabled, any sort of social safety net. Of course, we have corporate socialism here in America, where we bail out corporations and we give them huge tax breaks. They don't have to pay their fair share. But when it comes to individuals, we've got to have rugged individualism, and you can't have any assistance from the government. And so this phrase, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, is really popular. It's been popular for a long time. And it's so utterly silly because it comes from a phrase from a German writer. I have to look up his name really quickly because I always forget it. I put it in my notes. Give me a second. Rudolf Erich Raspe, who said that pull yourself up by your bootstraps was about creating an image that was so utterly preposterous and silly and nonsensical that you would know that it's impossible, right? But Americans have morphed it into something to mean like you lift yourself up out of poverty. You make your own way. Nobody helps you. And if somebody helps you, then you haven't truly earned any of the success that you have. You haven't earned the life that you have, and you have taken from somebody else. Think about if you were trying to climb a hill or a mountain and you grabbed your bootstraps to make yourself walk up the hill or the mountain. It's just such a silly, silly image. It's supposed to show how cartoonish it is. But instead of it being an example for us today of how we need each other, and really none of us have done everything all by ourselves. None of us have operated independent of the assistance of others. It's become a phrase that means the opposite of what it was intended. It's not a moral good to say you've pulled yourself up by your bootstraps. It's very silly because it's utterly untrue. And that gets me to my point that American individualism, which has morphed into toxic individualism, is not real. It never has been real. It is a myth. We don't operate independently. You don't make your own way in the world. And this is where I got so many comments of people being like, whoa, very, very, very upset. Being like, I have a right to my land and I go make my own homestead. And if you think that I am responsible to care for other people, that you're wrong. We've never done anything all by ourselves. So one of the consequences of living in a hyper-individualistic society, where the myth of the Lone Ranger, the myth of, Pa Ingalls, has been elevated so much, and we have these kind of big strongman leaders coming forward, we see a decline in empathy. When we see American prosperity go up, we see that people are less dependent on each other and less compassionate and less caring about each other. They believe more and more the myth of rugged individualism because they have the illusion that they don't need each other. But they do. When I talked earlier about how Americans balk at the idea of any social program, even though we have corporate socialism and we have no problem paying for and bailing out corporations, we don't want to have any safety nets for individuals because it's seen as you have to do it by your own merit. And if you don't do it on your own, if you have any assistance from the government, you're somehow cheating and you're stealing from those hardworking Americans that earned it in order for you to be a lazy layabout and we are paying your bills. That's really the mindset that gets repeated a lot. Those comments are really, really common on my social media. And it shows a complete lack of empathy for the suffering of other human beings, but it also really shows how much certain segments of our population are invested in a lie that they have done it all themselves and therefore somehow they are morally superior and they have earned what they have and therefore they don't have to share any. Like, I must have worked harder, so it's mine and I'm not obligated to anybody else. Those same Americans are perfectly happy to cash their economic stimulus checks, their pandemic relief checks that were money they did not earn. Just saying. Those same folks who say it's all about rugged individualism and I've earned everything and I don't rely on anybody else. It's me and my homestead and I don't rely on anybody else. Those same folks drive on roads that are built and maintained by taxpayer dollars. Those same folks drive on those roads in the winter when they are plowed using taxpayer dollars. Those same folks use the police and first responder and fire department services that are funded by tax dollars. They use the library. They go hiking in national parks. They don't do everything and use everything in their lives all on their own. There's a huge amount of infrastructure and support that is there because we have a collective society. It's an utter myth that you do everything all by yourself independently and you have earned everything you have independently without any assistance from anybody, and therefore you are morally superior. Toxic individualism blinds people to the reality that we already exist in community, and community supports help you become successful. And there are safety nets and supports that exist only because of community infrastructure. It also then reduces our empathy for other people who are struggling, who maybe don't have the privilege that we have. Maybe they have a lot of significant health problems. Maybe they're disabled. Maybe like me, they have less opportunity to earn income because they spend a lot of their time in unpaid caregiving. Just some thoughts. If you find that you get very upset when I talk about, or you hear other people talk about how we have an obligation to take care of each other, that we could be stronger and better if we had a more healthy way of communicating with each other, we could resolve our conflict better, and we functioned as a community. If you get your hackles up over that, I would really encourage you to sit and think about why that makes you so uncomfortable. One of my favorite snarky replies to men on the internet who love to tell me that I'm being a snowflake is that I love to tell them in reply, why are you so triggered by the thought that we have an obligation to take care of each other? I would hope that if you were disabled or when you are elderly and not able to take care of yourself, that someone would step up and take care of you. We deserve to be taken care of. We deserve to take care of each other. We have an obligation to each other. We can try to pretend it's not there because that reinforces our belief that we have made ourselves successful. Or perhaps, as my friend Meg said, perhaps what's going on is that there was somebody in your past who let you down when you needed help. Maybe there was a time you were really struggling, and if someone had come alongside you and assisted you, that process would have been less painful, less difficult, less onerous. There would have been less suffering in your life, and nobody did. And because you struggled and suffered, it means that other people should also struggle and suffer. It's like saying because I was hit as a kid, it's okay for me to hit my kids. Just because you experienced being let down, just because you didn't get what you deserved and what you needed, doesn't mean that then you should perpetuate that mentality. In fact, it should instill and spurn more empathy within you. I wish somebody had treated me this way when I was struggling, when I was suffering. And so I will do unto others what I wish had been done for me. So I would love your thoughts. I know this is a bit of a long video for a response video. I just got so many comments that I felt it deserved a response. What is the way forward when folks have such a strong reaction to even beginning to talk about what it would look like if we had a more functional community and if we jettisoned our cultural baggage of self-sufficiency and rugged individualism, now that it has become something very twisted and toxic that is damaging all of us and making us less resilient? So I'd love your thoughts in the comments. I am going to go refill my hot water bottle because my furnace is broken and it is 54 degrees in the house and I am freezing. But I will be back very soon to talk a little bit more about social permaculture. Also, I am picking persimmons and jujubes out of my garden now. So I'm going to have 2 videos taste testing those coming up in the next few days, and I hope you will tune in to watch them. Thanks.